Right, good afternoon. Let's start with the most important first, and that is a huge congratulations to the men's Spanish team on its World Cup victory yesterday. They now join the Spanish women's team in being the reigning football world champions. First time one country has held both men and women's team championship at the same time. I think by every account, it was a very impressive run by La Roja during the championship, during the games, and well played to all the other teams as well, who during 5 weeks provided the world with a lot of emotion, passion, joyfulness, and a little bit of heartbreak for some of us. But congratulations to La Roja. That's it. No, sorry. I wish. I know, please, exactly. In a short while, we will be joined by Carlos Ruiz Massieu, the Secretary General Special Representative for Haiti and head of the UN Integrated Office for Haiti. He will join us as soon as he's done with the Security Council meetings on Haiti. Then tomorrow, our friend Maximo Torero, FAO's chief economist, will join us virtually to brief on the launch of the State of Food Security and Nutrition 2026 report. It is co-authored by the FAO, IFAD, UNICEF, WHO, and the World Food Program. He will also be, a number of those experts from those agencies will also be joining. Meanwhile, our Secretary General is on his way back to New York from China, where he will arrive late tonight following his attendance at the opening ceremony of the World AI Conference in Shanghai. He traveled to Yunnan Province this morning in Kunming. The Secretary General interacted with beneficiaries and local counterparts of UN programs from agencies such as UNDP, FAO, and UN IFAD, and UN Women, supporting the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals in China. He heard firsthand accounts from beneficiaries of projects on biodiversity conservation, ecosystem restoration, promoting nature-based solutions, and the sustainable use of medicinal plant and community-based conservation efforts linked to local livelihoods. As I said, Secretary General will be back in the office tomorrow. Also today, Courtney Rattray, the Secretary General's chef de cabinet, delivered remarks on behalf of the Secretary General at the General Assembly in observance of Nelson Mandela Day, which was observed on Saturday. In his remarks, the Secretary General paid tribute to the life and legacy of Madiba. He highlighted that Mandela Day reflects the defining challenge of our time, poverty, inequality, and celebrated Madiba's ability to see world both for what it was and what it could be, having recognized that progress is never automatic, it is a result of action. To honor that legacy, the Secretary General encouraged all of us to carry forward Mandela's vision of a just, inclusive, equal, and peaceful world. We have been getting over the weekend questions about the fighting in the Middle East, and I can tell you that we are indeed concerned by the resurgence of hostilities and renewed escalation across much of the region. Immediate de-escalation is essential. And as a reminder, as in any conflict, the protections of civilian objects is critical. Vital infrastructure on which civilians rely for survival, including hospitals and water supplies, must be spared. All parties must respect their obligation under international humanitarian law, including the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution. Also, on a related note, that we've seen the reports and are very much concerned by the renewed Houthi threats against Saudi Arabia, against freedom of navigation, which leads to the risk of an even wider regional escalation. We call for immediate de-escalation. We urge all parties to address their differences through dialogue and diplomacy, and reiterate that Security Council Resolution 2722 and subsequent resolutions related to Houthi attacks against merchants and commercial vessels must be fully respected. Hans Grunberg, our special envoy for Yemen, is in Muscat, Oman today for discussions. He concluded a visit to Riyadh yesterday, where he met with the president of the Presidential Leadership Council, Rashad al-Halimi, the ambassador of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to Yemen, Mohammed al-Jaber, and representatives of the permanent 5 members of the Security Council. Their discussions focused on the need for the de-escalation, for the parties to agree on a way forward to preserve the gains of the 2022 UN-brokered truce. The special envoy also stressed the importance of insulating Yemen from the wider regional escalation and for safeguarding the space for an inclusive Yemeni-led political process and to end the conflict comprehensively. Moving to Lebanon, we welcome the launch of the pilot zone operations in the village of Frun, Srifa, and Zautar and Al-Gharbia in accordance with the trilateral framework. We encourage Lebanon and Israel to pursue efforts towards the full implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701. The UN interim force in Lebanon continued to observe violations of Lebanese airspace, including extensive unmanned aerial system activity across the area of operations and reconnaissance quadcopters over or near UN positions in both Sector West and Sector East. UNIFIL also observed incidents involving drones releasing ammunition in proximity to civilian areas and UN positions. UNIFIL peacekeepers continued to discover unauthorized weapons caches and unexploded ordnance in the mission's area of operation. UNIFIL continues also to see and observe IDF kinetic activity in both sectors, including tank fire and small arms fire. UNIFIL also continued to observe broader IDF ground activity throughout the mission's area of operations. Meanwhile, our peacekeepers themselves continue to face restriction and impediments to freedom of movement across the area of operations. On Saturday, an IDF checkpoint near Nukura, which is the headquarters of the UNIFIL presence in southern Lebanon, blocked a UNIFIL convoy for approximately 3.5 hours before it, for about 3.5 hours. Turning to the occupied Palestinian territory, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tells us that over the weekend, Israeli authorities issued displacement orders to families in the Zaytun neighborhood east of Gaza City in proximity of the so-called Yellow Line that was established by Israel. More than 30 families were displaced as their tents were destroyed. We and our partners have assessed these families' needs and are preparing to distribute tarpaulins, jerry cans, hygiene kits, blankets, and mattresses. Yesterday, OCHA team met with local partner organizations implementing a multi-purpose cash assistance project in Gaza City. This project is funded by the OPT Humanitarian Fund and helps vulnerable families, particularly female-headed households, to cover essential needs such as food and clothing. So far, more than 200 families in Jabalia and Beit Lahia in northern Gaza have received this assistance. Turning to the West Bank, I can tell you that we are warning against escalating Israeli settler attacks against Palestinians as they continue to cause casualties, property damage, and displacement. On Saturday, our humanitarian colleagues at OCHA in the West Bank documented an attack in which 2 Palestinians were killed and others injured. During this attack, settlers, including armed people accompanied by Israeli forces, raided the village of Deir Jarir in the Ramallah governorate and reportedly attempted to seize sheep, triggering confrontations with Palestinian residents. In a separate attack on the same day, settlers set fire to a Palestinian home and agricultural land in the village of Tel in the Nablus governorate, displacing a family of 5. And we condemn all these attacks by settlers on Palestinian communities. OCHA stresses once again that the Palestinians across the occupied Palestinian territory must be protected, the killings and violence must stop, and perpetrators must be held to account. And just back here this morning, as I mentioned, Carlos Ruiz Massieu briefed the Security Council on the situation in the country. Monica Juma, the executive director of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, also briefed the council and said that Haiti's armed gangs are no longer simply seeking to capture territory. They are seeking to capture the systems of governance and the economic lifelines on which communities and institutions depend. To help put Haiti on the path to peace, she told council members we must respond to the urgent needs on the ground while building institutions capable of sustaining long-term stability as well as the rule of law. For her part, Vanessa Frazier, the Secretary General Special Representative on Children and Armed Conflict, said her recent visit to Haiti, which she briefed you on in great detail recently, left her with a strong sense of urgency, but also a sense that there's real opportunity to make progress if the international community joins forces in support of Haitian authorities. All of the remarks we've received were shared with you. And turning to Sudan, our humanitarian colleagues warn that the ongoing violence continues to imperil civilians, it continues to drive displacement of civilians, and it continues to deepen needs, including in the Kordofan and Darfur regions. As the violence continues, humanitarian needs are also on the rise. In North Kordofan, the World Food Programme warns that the humanitarian situations in El Obeid is rapidly deteriorating as displacement towards the city grows, with nearly 400,000 human beings across the districts of Sheikha, Bara, and Garbara already facing emergency levels of acute food insecurity. In central Darfur State, recent assessment by our partners identified food as the top priority for some 236,000 displaced men, women, and children across 5 locations. And in South Darfur, nearly 4,000 families displaced by recent intercommunal violence urgently need emergency shelter, as well as essential household items. We once again call for the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure in this conflict and every other conflict. We also reiterate the need for rapid and flexible funding so that our partners can respond to the growing needs across Sudan. To date, this year's humanitarian appeal for Sudan is less than 39% funded, with only $1.1 billion received for the nearly $2.9 billion required. We thank warmly those who have given us cash, and we ask others to do so. Turning to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, 2 items for you. Our peacekeeping colleagues in the DRC tell us that on Friday they intervened in support of Congolese armed forces in Komanda, which is, as you all know, in Ituri province. This was to prevent an escalation of violence following the assassination of a local armed group leader. As we reported last week, UN peacekeepers have established a mobile operating base in Morabo to deter further attacks against healthcare facilities and civilians. This underscores the mission's continued commitment to protect civilians in areas affected by Ebola. And on that note, our OCHA colleagues tell us that they're concerned about the spread of Ebola in displacement sites in the eastern part of the DRC. Confirmed Ebola cases have been reported in at least 16 of these sites across Ituri. These sites host more than 270,000 people. Those sites are overcrowded and they have limited access to basic services, and which obviously increases the risk of disease transmission. We and our partners continue to support displaced communities through prevention, awareness activities, including the installation of hand washing stations and community outreach on Ebola prevention measures. However, needs continue to outpace the resources that we have. Last week, you'll recall that we and our humanitarian partner launched a revised 2026 appeal for the DRC, raising funding requirements from $1.4 billion to $2.3 billion United States dollars. This is all in response to the growing humanitarian needs, which we tell you about almost every day, including those linked to Ebola outbreak. The plan aims to provide life-saving assistance to 10.7 million human beings through the end of the year. We continue to call for increased international support to sustain the Ebola response and for life-saving assistance to displaced communities already facing years of conflict, years of displacement, and years of deteriorating living conditions. Meanwhile, in Burundi, our OCHA colleagues tell us that we and our humanitarian partners continue to support government-led efforts to strengthen Ebola preparedness. Surveillance and early detection have been reinforced at priority points of entry in border communities. More than 75,000 travelers have undergone health screening at UN-supported entry points since June 24th. Infection prevention and control measures have also been strengthened. This includes the provision of protective equipment, such as masks for frontline personnel at priority border points. We and our humanitarian partners are working with the government to train frontline workers, community health workers, health professionals, and border health officials. We're also supporting screening and infection control equipment, the improvement of water, sanitation, hygiene infrastructure, and the establishment of temporary isolation sites. At the end of June, Tom Fletcher, our emergency relief coordinator, allocated $2 million from the Central Emergency Response Fund to strengthen Ebola operational readiness in Burundi to help reach 215,000 people. Since the outbreak began, SURF has allocated a total of $24 million from the rapid response and early action in countries at high risk of the spread of Ebola across the region. This is part of Tom Fletcher's broader commitment to allocate up to $60 million from SURF to accelerate the response in the DRC and support preparedness in other countries who are at risk. And from Ukraine, our colleagues on the ground report attacks over the weekend have claimed dozens of civilian lives and injured many more across the country. As a result of the attacks, 2 humanitarian warehouses sustained damages, the World Food Program, the Dnipro, and WHO in Kyiv. Our humanitarian coordinator and resident coordinator in Ukraine, Matthias Schmale, underlined the devastating toll of these attacks on civilians, including urban centers near the front lines. Despite all of these challenges, we and our humanitarian partners are providing emergency response after attacks and delivered 11 metric tons of aid to frontline communities in Kherson. The supplies included water, hygiene, dignity kits, first aid kits, and medicine. New resident coordinator, the UN Development Coordination Office tells us that following the government approval, the Secretary General has appointed Njoya Tikoum of Cameroon as the new resident coordinator in Burkina Faso. He takes up his post He took up his post July 18th. Will also serve as humanitarian coordinator. He brings nearly 2 decades of leadership experience across the UN system with expertise in sustainable development, governance, peace building, and many other areas. And he was lastly director of the UN Development Programme Sub-Regional Office for West and Central Africa and resident representative for UNDP in Senegal. We congratulate him. Note from our UNESCO colleagues who tell us that the UNESCO World Heritage Committee has begun its 48th session in Busan, South Korea. It's always an interesting meeting. The committee will examine nominations for the inscription of 30 new World Heritage sites. Nominations include the beaches of the D-Day landings in Normandy and the Mount Amel castles in Lebanon, among others. The committee will also assess the state of conservation at 147 sites already on the list, and as you know, many unfortunately get damaged during conflict. UNESCO World Heritage status recognizes and protects natural, cultural, and mixed sites for present and future generations. To date, the World Heritage Committee has inscribed over 1,200 sites in 170 countries on their list. 2 important days today. One on this earth, and it is World Chess Day. The day commemorates the game's role as a platform to foster dialogue and solidarity across barriers of language, age, gender, physical ability, or social status. And another one further from this earth. So what international day it is it today? Close. International Moon Day, Amélie. It is International Moon Day, which marks the anniversary of the first moon landing as part of the Apollo 11 lunar mission 1969. As moon exploration efforts continue to take shape, this global celebration will serve as a reminder of past successes, as well as an annual testimony to future endeavors in outer space that should benefit all of humankind. Excuse me. Speaking of humankind, Gabriel.
Hi, good morning, Steph. I have a question about the Houthi have announced a maritime blockade of Saudi Arabia. And my question for you is, does the Secretary General call on the Houthis to reverse this decision?
Yes. I mean, I think you may have been lulled into a certain sense when I was reading off the various notes, but I did speak to that, expressed our concern about the new announcement, and call for the full implementation of the relevant Security Council resolutions, which call on the Houthis to stop kinetic activity in that area, and there needs to be full freedom of navigation. And we're also concerned about their threats towards Saudi Arabia.
And this is now potentially a second choke point in the general region, given what we have in the Strait of Hormuz. How is this going to affect potentially UN transport of humanitarian goods?
Look, I mean, it's obviously another choke point. We've seen the Red Sea already being choked off in the past. We don't want to see a return to that. I mean, it will of course impact the flow of UN goods that are shipped, notably humanitarian goods and elements for peacekeeping. But much more worryingly, it will again have a negative impact on global commerce, on the trade in energy, and just commerce as a whole. And we're already seeing the impact of the near closure of the Strait of Hormuz and what impact that is having on the global economy. Okay. Abdelhamid, I see you, so I assume you have a question?
Yes, in fact, I have to. Thank you. First, on Saturday, Israeli attacked a Palestinian funeral, killing 9, including 2 children, and wounding 20. Such an attack on a funeral, how could it pass without pinpointing toward this heinous crime of killing civilians in a funeral?
Look, we have and will continue to condemn all killings of civilians. I did not personally get a report on that incident. I think we reported on other things that we have seen both in Gaza and in the occupied West Bank. Your second question.
My second question, Prime Minister Netanyahu said that I control now 70% of Gaza and I will continue encroaching on the territory of Gaza to, as he said it, to choke Hamas. Do you have any comment on this statement?
Look, I mean, I think we have referred to the so-called yellow line that Israel has established. Again, today, we talked about the displacement of even more Palestinian families. Palestinians need to control Gaza as part of a unified Palestinian area, which includes both, obviously, the West Bank and Gaza. Okay.
Thank you.
I see you've all been exhausted by a sporting weekend, so I will see you tomorrow.